next speaker is a TED talker with a specialism in empathetic communication, leadership, diversity, equality, and inclusion. I had to read that because I couldn't memorize it. She's featured in Mary Claire, Harper's Bazaar, and Forbes. She has a BA in natural science from Cambridge University, decided she wanted a dark blue, did a PGC in Oxford University, and then decided that wasn't enough and went across to Emory University in the USA to get a master's in science. This woman is very clever. She's authored 2 books on presentation. She's an international Toastmasters champion and is a very good speaker. Please can everybody put their hands together, raise the roof, empathy and inclusive leadership at work, Shola Kaye.
Thank you very much. After that introduction, I have to share that I've been fired from 2 jobs. And that's how I came to be interested in empathy, because in both of those workplaces, there wasn't very much empathy going around. So I want to share with you this quote, that empathy, this is a quote from Michelle Obama, empathy is recognition that other people's experiences have value too. And in this world today, it's so easy, isn't it, to center everything around ourselves. And we have these echo chambers, we're in a bubble. And so it's very important to recognize that other people may have completely different experiences than our own. Last year, an article came out in Forbes suggesting that empathy is the most important leadership skill. Put your hand up if you're a leader here. Okay, quite a few of you. Brilliant. So what I'll be doing is talking about why it's so important to be more empathetic and also how that can contribute to being a more inclusive leader. And sorry, I'm getting this clicker around the wrong way. Here we go. Here's some data. That empathy skills are absolutely important to managers. They're essential. 77% of workers said they would work longer hours for a more empathetic employer. And you can see here, 80% of millennials said they would leave if their employer became less empathetic. And that number goes up to 90% for Generation Z. Now, inclusive leaders are empathetic, and empathy starts with this thing, curiosity. It starts with curiosity, and it goes on to listening. And I want to do a little exercise in just a moment with you. So I know that a lot of you here, put your hand up if you know someone here in the room already. Okay, nearly everyone does. Put your hand up if you don't know anyone here today. Okay, a couple of people. Excellent, excellent. I'm glad to hear that. So in a minute, I just want you to do a very quick exercise where you'll be sharing with somebody next to you. But empathy starts with curiosity. It starts with curiosity, which then leads to listening. And the best leaders tend to be excellent listeners. So they might, for example, make time for office hours where people can come and see them and share problems that they've got going on. They might make it possible for people to speak to you privately so that people can share what's going on for them without everyone else hearing. And then also, good leaders encourage dissent. They're quite happy for people to disagree or to share their own viewpoints that might differ from that leader. Now, a lot of us aren't great listeners. And so I want to do a little exercise now. There are many types of bad listener, but here are 5. Now, as I go through these, I want you to recognize which of these are you. And there's always 1 or 2 that say, oh, I'm none of those. So then to you people, I say, if you were one, which one would it be? So the first kind of bad listener is what we call the stage hog. Now, these are people who they love to take whatever's being spoken about and make it about them. So you might be chatting to a friend and say, oh, you know, I went on a fantastic date last night. And then they say, oh, well, I went on a brilliant date and my date took me here and we went on this great dinner. And they kind of do a bit of one-upmanship, right? So put your hand up if you've ever been a stage hog. Yeah, quite a few people here. What about a pseudo? So pseudos, it's very easy to be a pseudo in this day and age because there's so much happening online. So pseudos pretend to listen, but really they're not that clued in. They're not listening very hard. So put your hand up if you've ever been a pseudo. I'm definitely pseudo when I speak to my sister on the phone, for example. Selectives are people who only prick up their ears to listen when something's interesting, and otherwise they just tune out. So any selectives here today? Okay, quite a few. And then people don't like to claim these last 2, right? So ambushes are people who listen because they want you to make a mistake. And then they say, you're wrong. So any ambushes, any brave ambushes here today?
Only if I dislike the person.
Okay, there we go. So you've got at least 5 hands going up. That's really good. Great audience today. And then finally, defensives. So if you ever go into a meeting and there's someone that always, you come and you say, let's change the process. Let's make this different. And they say, why should we change? It's great just as it is, right? And they take it personally that you're suggesting a change. These are often people who are defensives. So any defensives here today? All right. We need to talk later on. So, bad listening can often be contextual as well. So certain people, we behave like a stage hog. Certain people, we're defensive. So just some things to think about here. So what is your default bad listening style? And I often get people saying that they are all of them, right? And then with whom and when. And listening is so important, and we're often talking about the latest gadget or ChatGPT or AI or whatever's happening, and yet listening is the old chestnut that never goes out of style. So Josh Bersin is a HR consultant in California, and he did some research on different companies, different sizes, different industries, and he found that organizations that listen to their employees, that hear what is being said and act upon it, this is the impact, right? So 12 times more likely to engage and retain, 8.5 times more likely to satisfy and retain customers, right? Nearly 8.5 times more likely to inspire a sense of belonging, just from simply listening. So the second thing about inclusive leadership is that it requires courage. Put your hand up if you think you're a brave and bold individual. Okay, not everyone. Fair enough. So Deloitte did a big study a few years ago on what it takes to be an inclusive leader, and they came up with these 6 traits. So the first one is to be welcoming of alternative views or alternate views than your own. Second is increasing your cultural intelligence, making sure that you're going out, you're learning about different cultures, different ways of being. Thirdly is sharing your personal weaknesses, so having the humility to actually share that you don't always know the answer or that you're not always right. Then we've got being aware of your bias. And anyone heard of the IAT test? It's a test that you can go online and do. It's run by Harvard University, and you can actually go and check your biases against black people with guns, Asians, LGBTQIA. There's all sorts of different groups in there. You can go in and do a test and see what biases you have. So that's worth a look. Also, committing visibly to diversity and inclusion is another trait of inclusive leaders. And then finally, they're very good at collaborating effectively. Now, those of you who run meetings regularly, one thing you might want to be thinking about is how can you get people to be happier disagreeing with you? How can you encourage dissent? And I was doing some work for the Ministry of Justice, and it was a leadership session, and somebody said, well, in my meetings, nobody ever speaks, it's only me. And I said, well, there's lots of reasons why that could be. So some of these inclusion nudges could be great ways to get people to speak up and feel safer around you. So first of all is encouraging dissent. So you might say to your team members, well, for every idea you share with me, I want you to share a reason why that idea won't work. Or one executive I spoke to said he loves sharing ideas with his team and saying, yeah, this is what we should do next. But then he says to them, right, I'm going to go around the room and I want each of you to tell me why my idea won't work. So if you're somebody who loves coming up with some new, fresh ideas, then that could be a great way to empower people to push back. Virtual meetings. Virtual meetings were great. When we got into COVID, people were saying, wow, I would never speak up in a big meeting at work, but now I can just put something in the chat. So are you making sure that people are able to share their comments, whether it's through the chat or even anonymously? You might get somebody who's not a part of the meeting or who's in the meeting and is just there to receive emails from people who are in that virtual meeting, and people just share their thoughts and their comments, and then that person will read them out or share them later on with the group anonymously so that everybody's ideas get an opportunity to be heard. Also, little things like circulating agendas ahead of time. Anyone here an introvert? Yeah, quite a few. So introverts often need a bit of time to think. They're not so great at speaking up spontaneously. So just something like sharing what we're going to talk about in this next meeting can be really empowering for introverts, just to have a time to think and prepare. And then finally, rotating who runs the meeting. Anyone here runs meetings regularly? Okay. So if you've got a team, maybe empower somebody in that team to run the meeting next time, because you'll see that different aspects come out of different people. Some people will speak up if someone else is running the meeting compared to when you run it. So give that a try as well. So there's a few ways that you can create a bit more inclusion in your meetings. So anyone here do any of those? Put your hand up if you're somebody that maybe puts agendas out ahead of time, or you allow people to express dissent. Excellent. And if you don't, have a think about why, and think about what you could incorporate in your next meeting. So the third thing I want to talk about is inclusive leaders being allies. And we talk a lot about allyship in the world of diversity and inclusion. And an ally is an individual who is up for challenging or disrupting in support of those who don't have a voice or those who are underrepresented. And some of you may have seen this before. I won't spend a lot of time on it, but this is called the Wheel of Power and Privilege. And the groups closer to power, at least in the Western world typically, let's just take language for example, people who are native speakers of English, moving out to people who are learning English or learned English as a second language, moving out to those who perhaps don't speak English well at all. Or if we take, for example, body size, right? So we've got people who have got a smaller body size, moving out to people who've got a larger body size. So some people will find that they are pretty much close to that power circle, right, all the way through. Whereas others will find that there are some areas of their identities where they're at the edge, they're at the fringes, and others where they're not. Now, we use this term privilege. Put your hand up if the term privilege is a little bit kind of jolting to you, if it triggers you somewhat. Okay, yep, it's fair enough. And so to move away from that term so that we can just stop being triggered and instead just kind of do the work that needs to be done, we can use these terms instead, headwind and tailwind. So a headwind is that wind that's blowing in your face and just making it a little bit harder for you to proceed. And a tailwind is the wind that's at your back and it's just like, oh, you know, and sometimes you're not even aware that the tailwind is there, but things tend to go pretty easily, things go quite smoothly a lot of the time. So if you don't like the term privilege, what you can use instead is headwinds and tailwinds. So you might say, well, I have a tailwind because of, perhaps I'm able-bodied, but I have a headwind because maybe I grew up in an environment where I only had one parent around. So this can be language that you use instead of privilege. So I want you to have a think about what are your headwinds and what are your tailwinds. And this process, just the actual thinking about these headwinds and tailwinds, helps us to be more empathetic. Because I've done sessions where people have thought, well, you know what, I don't think I've got a single headwind in my life. And then others will say I've got multiple headwinds. So I want to just take a moment, literally just like 30 seconds, and just turn to the person next to you and just share with them one headwind and one tailwind. Let's hear a couple of tailwinds in the room. Just yell out 2 or 3 tailwinds.
Health.
Health, thank you. Any others?
Experience.
Experience. Thanks.
Confidence.
Confidence. There was another one back there. Curly hair. Okay, all right. Gender. Ginger, someone said. All right. Headwind or tailwind, maybe. Okay, yeah, brilliant, thank you. And then let's hear a few headwinds. Ginger again, all right.
Gender came up as well.
Age, gender, yeah, fantastic. Any more? accent, health, woman, mental health was that? Yeah, thank you. Let's hear 3 more.
Lack of technical experience.
Lack of technical experience, thank you.
Self-esteem.
Self-esteem, there was one.
Gaps in knowledge.
Gaps in knowledge, brilliant. Let's have 1 more before I carry on.
Lack of confidence.
Lack of confidence, okay, thank you. All right, so yeah, hopefully you've all shared, your deepest, darkest headwinds with each other. Very much a bonding experience. So what I want to share now is something that I talk about calling out and calling in, and we often hear this, it's a call-out culture now. Everyone's too quick to denounce other people when they do something that kind of, goes against the grain or goes against what, Gen Z and younger people feel is appropriate. But calling out is not the only thing we can do. We can also do something called calling in. And so I want to spend a moment now talking about the two of these, making the distinction and just sharing some behaviours from calling out and calling in. So calling out is typically when you see something happening that you think is so unacceptable that you just have to stop it in its tracks, right? Maybe someone's being bullied, maybe there's been some teasing happening that's just kind of gone too far, right? But if you feel that it needs to be stopped there and now, then you need to call out. And typically when we're calling out, what can be helpful is to use I statements to own how you feel about what you're seeing. So you might be saying something like, I think that's unacceptable, that needs to stop. Or, I don't agree with that. Can you stop that now? So we can own that, and if you use those I statements, then nobody can really push back, because they can't disagree with how you feel about what you're seeing. Now the other side to that is calling in. And calling in, sometimes people might think it's the easier option, right? Calling in is where you're having a conversation that's grounded in curiosity. So you're hearing somebody say something that you feel perhaps is unacceptable or like a bit dodgy or whatever. And so instead of saying, well, I don't agree with that, that needs to stop, you say, that's interesting. Where did you hear that? Or, I'd love to know more. How did you come across that particular viewpoint? Or you might even say, that's curious. I'm curious about that. That's very 1980s, that view, right? Just things like that can help. And it's more about reflecting on what you're hearing rather than reacting to it. And here you can use you statements to show that you're curious. So where did you manage to formulate that opinion? So you put you in there instead. And the thing about calling out and calling in, some people are more disposed to calling out. Some people love a bit of a, they're quite happy to have a bit of a verbal scuffle, right? And other people hate the idea of any form of conflict. So put your hand up if you think you're more of a call out person. Okay, a few of you. If you're more of a call in, put your hand up. Okay. And the thing about calling in, even that can be hard sometimes, because we often, we're watching TV and we see people have, there's a big emotional conversation and then it's all resolved immediately. And so we might put pressure on ourselves to say, well, I'm going to have this call-in conversation and it's all going to be resolved and they'll understand. And they might still disagree with you, right? Or you might not reach resolution, but at least you've done something. So those of you who are more disposed to calling in, brilliant. If not, calling out is fine as well. Or it can depend on what you're seeing happen and also your relationship with that individual. So I want to share a little bit about a calling in experience that I had once, and a calling out and a calling in experience that I watched somebody do. And I used to be fostered. So when I was I think from the age of about 3 months until I was 11, I was fostered. And I lived with a white elderly couple, and my foster mum, I called her Mummy V, so her surname was Benton, so I always called her Mummy V. Now, Mummy V was a very quiet person. She was an introvert. She was certainly not somebody who loved conflict at all. But she was a real, I guess, a beacon for me. She was somebody that I really looked up to because she was not afraid to call out or call in when she saw things going on. So this happened when I was a little baby, but when I was in a pushchair, she was walking along, and it's a white woman with a little brown baby in a pushchair, and so she bumped into a neighbour who was also fostering another white woman with a black kid in a pushchair. And so this neighbour said to her, "Oh, well, you've got one too, have you? Oh." And, and so Mummy V said, yes, I do. So then the neighbour says, "Oh, what do you feed yours?" "I just feed mine boiled rice because it's really cheap and they don't know any better." And so Mummy V was scandalised, and she said, "I can't believe you do that. I feed my kids the same things that me and my husband and I eat." And with that, she just took the pushchair and just kind of walked off in disgust. So she was quite happy to call out this woman at that time. Now, many years later, Mummy V is now 94, right? So she's living in a care home, and she can barely see. She walks with a stick, and she doesn't have very long left, right? This is a few years ago this happens. So I went to see her at the care home, and she's very happy to see me. And then she went off and ate her tea with the other residents. And while I was sitting in the next room, I heard one of the residents call out, "What's that blackie doing in here? Tell her to go home. We don't need those types here." And I thought, okay, well, you know, he's expressed his views. And I thought, okay, so I'll wait for Mummy V to come out and I'll say goodbye. Anyway, I didn't expect Mummy V to say anything. She's 94, right? She's frail. She's, you know, she can barely see. But then I hear Mummy V's voice, and she called out this guy at 94, and she said, "She's done nothing to hurt you. Leave her alone. We're all God's children." Now, when we're in the workplace and we're seeing things, you know, that we disagree with, or we feel that we should call out or call in, we're always thinking, well, should I do that? I see this person every day. What are they going to do? They could make life hard for me. So we've always got these questions going on. And I want you to just take heart, I guess, from this story about Mummy V, who at 94 didn't miss a beat to call out or call in as needed, because she just did what she thought was right. So what Mummy V did, she called out, she called in, she was courageous. We talked about courage. She was bold. She wasn't thinking about her own comfort. She lived in the same property as this guy. He could make life very difficult for her. But she still said what she did. And she didn't allow her quiet personality to stop her. So I want to leave you with thinking about that, thinking about calling out, calling in, being an inclusive leader. And as all keynote speakers must, you know, create a little mnemonic at some stage, right? So allyship, we talked about courage, and we talked about empathy. So how can you incorporate those into your daily leadership practices? So I want to thank you so much for your time. I've got a QR code as well. I think we all probably will today. So if you want a list of calling out and calling in phrases that you can use, then go ahead and you can grab that. And then also empathy in the workplace. My company talked to 15 international business leaders about their views of empathy and how it could be incorporated into the workplace. So I'm very happy to send you both of those PDFs. But I want to thank you so much for your time, and go forth and be ace.